Today we're trying something a little bit different and reviewing a single player game this time instead of a multiplayer or live service thing, and I think I have a good structure to go on, so I'll start off with the game that I found most interesting, the lot that I played recently, and that is Ash of Gods: The Way. I would really describe this game as a Plants vs. Zombies meets Bannerlord experience, with the card system, deck building, and lane-based gameplay of Plants vs. Zombies with the art style, strategy, and the visual novel elements of a Bannerlord's game. I would highly recommend the game based on this combination alone. It's available on Steam and Switch, with the gameplay shown here being from my Switch version. The game itself is actually surprisingly long, at about 20 to 30 hours, with multiple different difficulties to choose from as well, to extend that playtime. The game often goes on sale for about $10, which is what I was able to do here, get it on an eShop, but the base game is $25. I would also absolutely recommend the game at that full price, because I do think it is worth it. The game itself is a sequel to the previous Ash of Gods game, but you don't need to have played the first game in order to understand the story or any of the character moments. It also runs very well on Switch from a performance standpoint, so no worries there. This game also, is important to note, is a single-player game only and does not have any multiplayer components. So I kind of want to talk about first the gameplay loop of this game and what you can expect going into it, because as the title and as the things I said there might be a little bit confusing. So the gameplay loop of this game is mostly spent in battles that you select from a tournament or overview map, with a sprinkling of visual novel medieval storytelling after you complete set goals or challenges. The choices made in these sections do actually affect the objectives you have to complete later on, so don't ignore these sections of the game, as they can make the game much harder or easier depending on what you choose. After you beat an objective that you've selected on the map, you'll get rewards or cards to build better decks. There are also checkpoint fights with harder objectives but bigger rewards, which usually trigger a larger cutscene afterwards. So the gameplay loop ends up being you beat the smaller objectives to get cards to build a better deck to take on the tougher enemies, which once those are defeated, they show a cutscene with choices that affect the next battles that you end up doing. After you complete an area, whether it be a tournament or a stalemate, a larger story segment occurs as you move to the next area. This loop works really well, and each part is given time to shine, and the visual novel pieces don't feel annoying or overbearing. They add a good amount of story context and useful advice for each battle that you can click on and check about. You just click the Y button and it talks, hey, you might want to think about doing this because the battle is going to involve different variables. And it's also surprisingly fully voice acted as well, which is very nice.
That's
I know, but that is their way.
Will I also have to play with people if I agree? Do I have to kill them?
Yes, Finn, but sometimes you must make hard choices. Choose the lesser evil. After all,
I know, Uncle. It's just taking...
For the Parisians, it is more than a game, my boy. And you must accept that if you go to the tournament. Now, look at the map.
They're a very good addition to the game, and they break up the battles, which you will be doing a lot. This section here is just going to be talking about other card games and how it relates to this one. So if you played other card games, you'll be aware of how their challenge modes kind of work. They are set up with predetermined decks and playing fields with puzzles that need to be completed in a certain number of turns, or cards, or damage, etc. These are often restriction limited in what you have in your hand or what resources you have available. They offer a variety and teach strategies about the game, and have been pretty common staple in card games dating back to the early 2000s. An example from Yu-Gi-Oh! For instance, is dealing 3,000 points of damage in one turn using only what's on the field, and being given, 3 monster cards and a field spell, for example. Oftentimes, it's as easy as order of operations when applying monster effects, but other times it can involve much harder to understand chain reactions with what your opponent ends up doing. These challenge modes or puzzle modes of card games tend to get you thinking about the game in ways you never would before, and force thinking ahead and playing steps out. Unlike other card games, Ash of Gods 2: The Way doesn't have a default state. The closest to normal is simply beating the opponent commander by taking itself to 0, but even then, there are restrictions on units played, or there can be restrictions on units played, or modifiers on card abilities, or even changes in the map layout. The entire card game piece of this game is modular. It's a framework for a game using the systems introduced. This is a good thing generally, but it also means that the game is only ever as interesting as those scenarios and modifiers can be. This isn't a set card game with amount of rules and variables, it's a puzzle game that happens to use cards that is dictated by its modifiers. What I mean to say is that this game is only engaging and interesting so long as it's giving new ideas and challenges to overcome. It is not built to be a card game or a puzzle game by itself, and that'll make more sense once I explain how the game is actually played. The basic idea of the game is you play one unit and one spell or item each turn in any available lane. Those placed units move in their lane 1 or 2 spaces forward after the turn is concluded, and can be shifted to other lanes in an open spot adjacent to them once per turn. This means that when you shift a unit, that will come before the unit moves on that turn. Units you place cannot pass through other units, so placing a Guardian first and then a Ranger behind it means that Ranger will always be behind the Guardian unless you make either units switch their lanes. Once a unit is within combat range of an opponent's unit in their lane, they attack the opponent's unit or the commander itself if possible. Some units can retaliate when hit, but most cannot. Once a unit is defeated, it cannot come back, meaning you have a limited number of units you can play. Every unit has a health and damage number, along with some info on special modifiers that unit may get because of its class. The items and spells that you can play, again about once per turn, are basic things like adding attack or adding health, with some more complex options to deal damage or boost speed. Importantly, a lot of these spells and items you can use are class locked and only benefit certain classes. An item might say +2 attack to a bandit class, or all Birkins get +3 attack this turn, etc. This means that it's a good idea to have either all of one class or balance the items and units so that you don't accidentally run out of options, because you do have a limited amount of cards that you can play. And that's basically it. You place your units, you modify them with spells and items, you get them into combat by ending your turn or shifting lanes, you try and beat the opponent's unit in that lane, and you take out the commander. The units that attack are automatic and don't have any effects on them besides what you end up adding with items beforehand. The reason I call this Plants vs. Zombies Battles is because it's lane-based and it's automatic. Your unit in lane 1 will only fight the closest opponent unit in lane 1. The variety comes from the ever-changing map layouts and the objectives. Some of these will require you to beat 10 of your opponent's units, others restrict how many units you can play, or what classes can be played, or how many turns you have. This game itself isn't set up to be anything without its modifiers. As I said, certain units will lose to other ones just as a generality. There is less strategy and more setup when it comes to this game, and so you have little kind of potential for deck building or expression because of how the game is set up. I want to be very clear that this isn't a problem, and I do like how the game plays, but it's also not a traditional card game or an RPG or even a tactics game like Fire Emblem, which you may expect it to be from this footage. It is mostly a puzzle game trying to solve puzzles like you would in challenge or puzzle modes in other card games. So that's important to know. And so overall, I would say the unique elements of this game that make it really stand out are its Plants vs. Zombies style card puzzle base, as well as the unique hand-modeled animation and art style. That is mostly, these are 3D models that have a kind of filter around them and that are kind of drawn over, and that makes it really unique art style. The medieval visual novel elements as well. Again, after you beat some kind of commander or big event, a cutscene will play, and they'll be fully voice acted, and it'll take you through a bunch of different options for dialogue, and those options will affect the quality of the next battle. If it's harder, what the objectives are, that kind of thing. So as I said, the full voice acting and the changing of the battlefield is really a unique element. And so overall, this is a very good game in terms of what it's setting up to do, and it's quite unique in terms of how it's set up. Again, it's shockingly longer than I think a lot of people would expect this kind of game to be with what it's set up to be. It's about 20 to 30 hours, and from what I can tell, I'm not 100% through it, but from what it looks like, unlike some other games that have a similar kind of setup, this is not just something that ends up having like one campaign that's repeated 4 times, like Heroes of Might and Magic is. It is something where you have an entire story that follows you through the entire map campaign. So it's not just like, 4 separate campaigns you do like a lot of other games. It's a full-blown story accompanying your journey, right? So I think that's very good. And so, pros, everything I said there in terms of the quality of its animation and the build stuff you can do, as well as the kind of card game and the game itself. Cons, I think the only con at this point would definitely be it's not a card game or a RPG. So if you're expecting something like a Fire Emblem game or a tactics game, this is not that. This is more similar to even something like chess would be, or other games that are more puzzle-based rather than sort of RPG or role-playing based. So just be aware of that. And the kind of general consensus that this is a certain type of game for a certain type of person, right? There are no RPG elements, there are no stats or leveling or anything like that. It is just you get in, you do the puzzles, and you get out, right? So if you're looking for something that's a little bit more expansive than that, you're not going to really get that here. This is primarily focused, as I said, on that gameplay loop of getting in, completing the objective, getting rewards, building a better deck to get the stronger objectives. For platform issues, I didn't have any issues. I was running on the Switch. This also is available on Steam, and I haven't seen anyone complaining about issues there, so it runs very well on that. Performance is great. I've had no technical bugs or anything like that, which is very nice for this kind of game. You know, you expect this to do that. I believe this is the developer's second or third game. And as I said before, it's available for about $10, usually on sale, $25 normal. I would definitely recommend it at either price. I think it's very good. And so, yeah, I just kind of want to highlight this game and say this is something that definitely went under the radar. It came out in 2023. No one really played it, not a ton of, action on it. And so I wanted to highlight it and, say, hey, this is a game, you should check it out. Here are kind of the reasons. So, yeah, if you want to see more of this stuff, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, do all that. And I'll see everyone in the next video.